Most people believe self-control is about being strong, about resisting temptation, about forcing yourself to do the right thing even when every part of you wants to give up. We're told that if we fail, it's because we didn't try hard enough. And if we fall back into old habits, it's because we lack discipline. So every day becomes a quiet war inside our heads, fighting urges, fighting distractions, fighting ourselves, until eventually we get tired and blame our character for losing a battle that was never fair to begin with. But here's something most people never stop to question. What if self-control was never meant to feel like a fight at all? What if the people who seem the most disciplined in the world aren't winning because they're stronger, but because they're not fighting in the first place? In Japan, discipline doesn't come from willpower. It doesn't come from motivation or daily pep talks in the mirror. Instead, it comes from a subtle, almost invisible rule that shapes behavior before temptation even appears. A rule so quiet that you don't notice it working, yet so effective that self-control starts to feel automatic, almost effortless. That's why Japanese people don't constantly talk about discipline. They don't wake up every morning promising to be better than yesterday. They don't rely on self-control to survive a world full of notifications, cravings, and endless choices. They design their lives in a way that removes the need to fight themselves at all. In this video, you're going to discover the hidden Japanese rule that makes discipline happen without force, and why trying harder is often the exact reason self-control keeps slipping through your fingers. And if you want to understand habits, focus, and the quiet systems that actually work in real life, make sure to subscribe, because once you see this way of thinking, you'll never look at self-discipline the same way again. Most people assume that when they fail at self-control, something is wrong with them. They think they're lazy, undisciplined, or simply not strong enough. But the real problem isn't a lack of character. It's a misunderstanding of how self-control actually works. Willpower is not an unlimited resource. It's not something you can summon endlessly throughout the day. Every decision you make, every temptation you resist, every time you force yourself to focus, you're spending from the same small mental battery. And once that battery runs low, your brain doesn't ask for permission anymore. It looks for the fastest relief it can find. That's why self-control always collapses at the end of the day. You can stay disciplined in the morning, make good choices at noon, and still find yourself scrolling, snacking, or procrastinating at night, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't. It's not because you suddenly stopped caring. It's because your brain is exhausted from making too many decisions and fighting too many urges. Willpower doesn't fail all at once. It erodes quietly, decision by decision, until there's nothing left to hold the line. Modern life makes this even worse. Your phone vibrates, screens glow, ads follow you, food is always within reach, and entertainment is available in endless supply. You're expected to stay focused, productive, healthy, and calm while being surrounded by constant stimulation. Then, when you finally give in, you blame yourself for lacking discipline, without realizing that you were placed in an environment designed to drain your self-control as fast as possible. This is why trying harder rarely works. Every new rule you set for yourself becomes another burden on your willpower. Every promise to be more disciplined tomorrow just adds another battle to fight. And the more you rely on force, the faster you burn out. Self-control wasn't meant to be used this way. It was never designed to carry the full weight of your habits, your focus, and your lifestyle on its own. And this is where the Japanese approach quietly breaks away from everything you've been taught. Instead of asking, "How do I become stronger?" they ask a completely different question. A question that changes the entire game. Not how to fight temptation, but how to make temptation irrelevant in the first place. Instead of treating discipline as a personal battle, the Japanese way of thinking shifts the focus away from the individual entirely. It doesn't ask people to become tougher, stricter, or more motivated. It asks them to stop putting themselves in situations where toughness is required in the first place. In Japanese culture, there is a quiet understanding that behavior is shaped long before a decision is ever made. What you do is not a reflection of who you are, but a reflection of the environment you move through every day. This is why self-control is rarely framed as a moral issue. Failing to stay disciplined is not seen as a personal flaw. It's seen as a design flaw. If someone struggles to focus, the question is not, "Why are you so distracted?" but "Why is your environment making distraction so easy?" If someone falls into bad habits, the response is not shame or pressure, but adjustment. Change the surroundings, change the rhythm, change what is placed within reach. You can see this mindset everywhere once you know what to look for. Japanese homes are arranged to reduce friction and excess stimulation. Public spaces are calm, predictable, and structured. Daily routines follow a quiet order that removes the need for constant decision-making. Even children are guided through systems rather than lectures, learning behavior through repetition and structure instead of motivation and punishment. Discipline, in this sense, is not something you summon, it's something you step into. What looks like self-control from the outside is often just the absence of temptation on the inside. Fewer choices, fewer triggers, fewer moments that demand resistance. The goal is not to test the mind, but to protect it, not to strengthen willpower, but to conserve it. And when you live this way long enough, discipline stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like a natural consequence of how life is arranged. This way of thinking leads to a simple but radical idea, one that quietly governs much of Japanese daily life. You don't fix behavior by fixing people. You fix behavior by fixing the conditions around them. And once you understand this, you're ready to see the hidden rule itself, the principle that makes self-control almost unnecessary. The hidden rule itself is simple, almost disappointingly so, which is why it's so easy to overlook. In Japan, there is an unspoken belief that you should never rely on self-control when you can rely on structure instead. You don't try to change your behavior at the moment of temptation. You make the moment of temptation unlikely to exist at all. Discipline is not something you activate. It's something that emerges naturally when the environment stops pulling you in the wrong direction. This is why so much attention is placed on arrangement, order, and routine. Objects are placed with intention. Spaces are designed to guide movement without instructions. Days are structured to follow a predictable rhythm. When things have a place, when actions have a time, and when distractions are kept at a distance, the mind doesn't need to argue with itself. There is no dramatic internal dialogue, no heroic resistance. You simply do what the situation quietly encourages you to do. From the outside, it can look like impressive self-control, but from the inside, it feels almost passive. You're not choosing to be disciplined every moment. You're just moving through a system that makes the disciplined choice the default one. This is the key difference. In many cultures, discipline is about saying no again and again. In the Japanese approach, discipline is about designing life so that no rarely needs to be said. Once you understand this, a lot of things suddenly make sense. Why fewer choices can lead to more consistency. Why calm spaces support focus better than motivational speeches. Why people who seem effortlessly disciplined are often those who have quietly removed the need for constant self-control. They are not stronger. They are simply less exposed to friction and temptation. And this is where the real shift happens. When discipline stops being about force, it stops being exhausting. When you no longer have to fight yourself all day, energy returns, focus becomes steadier, habits stabilize without drama. The battle ends not because you won it, but because you stepped out of it entirely. In the next part, we'll look at real, everyday examples of how this rule shows up in Japanese life, and how the same principle can be applied to your own habits without turning discipline into another struggle. Once you start paying attention, this rule appears everywhere in ordinary Japanese life, not as a philosophy people talk about, but as a pattern quietly repeated day after day. It shows up in the way spaces are arranged, in how routines are respected, and in how temptation is handled long before it becomes a problem. What looks like discipline from the outside is often just careful preparation on the inside. In Japanese homes, objects tend to have a clear place and a clear purpose. There is very little visual noise, not because people are forcing themselves to be minimalists, but because clutter creates friction in the mind. When a space is calm, attention follows. When distractions are reduced, focus doesn't need to be summoned. Even small details, like keeping work tools separate from rest areas, help the brain switch modes without internal conflict. There's no need to argue with yourself about what you should be doing. The environment already makes the decision for you. You can see the same principle in daily routines. Meals happen at regular times. Activities follow a predictable flow. There is comfort in repetition, not boredom, because when your day has a rhythm, your mind doesn't waste energy deciding what comes next. Fewer decisions mean fewer chances for self-control to fail. Discipline becomes a byproduct of structure, not an act of resistance. Even in public life, this pattern holds. Spaces are designed to discourage excess rather than test restraint. Behavior is guided subtly through layout and social rhythm, not enforced through constant rules or warnings. Instead of pushing people to behave better, the system quietly makes certain behaviors easier and others less appealing. No lectures, no pressure, just design. This is why the Japanese approach feels so different. It doesn't ask people to be exceptional. It assumes people are human, easily distracted, easily tired, and instead of fighting those limits, it works around them. It builds a world that protects attention rather than drains it, and in doing so, makes self-control almost unnecessary. And when you compare this to how most of us live, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Most people live in environments that constantly demand self-control, and then wonder why they feel exhausted all the time. Your phone is always within reach. Notifications never stop. Food and entertainment are designed to be irresistible, and yet you're expected to stay focused, productive, and disciplined through sheer force of will. Every day becomes a test, and every test slowly drains you. When you finally fail, it feels personal, even though the conditions were stacked against you from the beginning. Compare this to the Japanese approach, where life is intentionally designed to reduce friction rather than increase it. Instead of placing temptation directly in front of themselves and hoping to resist, they quietly move it out of the way. Instead of relying on constant reminders to behave better, they create routines that make behavior predictable. Instead of adding more rules, they simplify the environment so fewer rules are needed at all. The difference isn't in character, it's in design. This contrast reveals something uncomfortable. What you call a lack of discipline is often just the result of living in a system that profits from your distraction. The more choices you face, the more willpower you're forced to spend, the more stimulation you're exposed to, the harder focus becomes. Expecting yourself to win that fight every day is not realistic. It's exhausting, and it's unnecessary. The Japanese model doesn't try to make people heroic. It tries to make life humane. By reducing decision fatigue and minimizing unnecessary stimulation, it preserves mental energy for the things that actually matter. Discipline, in this context, is not about control, it's about conservation, saving attention, saving effort, saving yourself from endless internal battles. And once you see this clearly, a practical question naturally follows. If discipline is really about design, then how do you redesign your own life so self-control stops feeling like a constant struggle? The answer isn't to change everything at once, or to build an iron wall overnight. The Japanese approach doesn't work through dramatic transformations. It works through small, quiet adjustments that slowly change how your days unfold. The goal is not to become more disciplined, but to need less discipline in the first place. The first shift is to remove temptation before you ever have to resist it. Every habit you're struggling with has a trigger somewhere in your environment. Something visible, something easy, something always within reach. Instead of promising yourself you'll say no next time, the Japanese mindset asks a different question. Why is this even here? When the trigger disappears, the battle disappears with it. Self-control isn't used, because it isn't required. The second shift is to reduce friction for the behaviors you actually want. Good habits fail not because you don't want them, but because they're inconvenient. When something requires too many steps, too many decisions, or too much setup, your brain avoids it. So the solution isn't motivation, it's simplicity. Make the right action the easiest action. When the path is smooth, consistency follows without effort. The third shift is to design your day to require fewer decisions. Decision fatigue is one of the fastest ways to drain self-control. When every hour is improvised, your mind is constantly negotiating with itself. The Japanese preference for routine isn't about rigidity, it's about relief. When certain actions happen at certain times, the mind can rest. Discipline becomes embedded in the rhythm of the day, not forced through constant choice. None of this feels impressive. There's no rush, no intensity, no sense of heroic struggle. And that's exactly the point. The Japanese approach respects human limits instead of denying them. It accepts that willpower is fragile, attention is limited, and discipline works best when it's quiet. Once you start applying these principles, something unexpected happens. You stop feeling like you're failing at self-control. And instead, you start feeling like life itself is finally working with you, not against you. As you begin to live this way, something subtle but important happens. You don't feel more disciplined. You feel less resistance. The habits that once required constant effort start to unfold on their own. Not because you changed who you are, but because you changed what surrounds you. When temptation no longer appears every few minutes, self-control stops being a skill you need to practice and becomes something you rarely think about at all. This is why the Japanese approach doesn't celebrate willpower. It treats willpower as a fragile backup system, not a lifestyle. Instead of asking people to push harder, it quietly removes the need to push. Fewer triggers, fewer decisions, fewer moments that demand internal struggle. What remains is a calmer mental state where attention can settle instead of being constantly pulled apart. Over time, this creates a powerful shift. You stop judging yourself so harshly. You realize that discipline was never about becoming a better person. It was about creating better conditions. When your environment supports you, consistency feels natural. Focus becomes steadier. Energy returns, not because you forced it, but because you stopped wasting it on endless self-control battles. And this leads to the final insight behind the hidden Japanese rule. The most disciplined lives are not built through strength, but through kindness toward human limits. They accept that the mind gets tired, that attention fades, and that temptation is inevitable when the system allows it. So instead of demanding perfection, they design for reality. When life is designed this way, discipline stops being something you chase. It becomes something that quietly follows. Not dramatic, not heroic, just stable, sustainable, and deeply human. As you step back and look at everything we've covered, one truth becomes clear. Discipline was never meant to feel like a daily battle. You were never supposed to spend your life fighting urges, resisting distractions, and blaming yourself for getting tired. The hidden Japanese rule shows us something far more humane. Real self-control doesn't come from forcing yourself to be stronger, but from designing a life that doesn't constantly test your limits. When your environment supports you, discipline stops feeling heroic. It becomes quiet, automatic, almost invisible. You don't wake up needing motivation. You don't rely on willpower to survive the day. You simply move through a system that gently guides your behavior in the right direction. And in that space, energy returns, focus steadies, habits settle without struggle. If there's one thing to remember, let it be this: when life is designed well, self-control becomes unnecessary. You don't win by fighting yourself harder. You win by no longer needing to fight at all. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this way of thinking resonated with you, and you want to explore more ideas about habits, focus, and quiet philosophies that actually work in real life, consider subscribing to the channel. New videos like this are coming soon. Until next time, take care and design your life with intention.